everybody, I'm FreeRider2142. Feel free to pause any point that you need if you need to read up on the descriptions and things like this. This will be a tutorial for basic controls building, basically joysticks, yoke, throttle, and two different types of yaws, one with pistons, one with rotators. This is just my way of editing. I use 4 mods when I edit: Overload, Fine Tuner, Designer Suit, and X-Ray. And I also use the transformer editor a lot. I'll leave this links in the description for all these mods. Now, whenever I start working on things like joysticks, throttles, I start from a new creation. I build them there, and then I export them as completed parts, as sub-assemblies basically, and then I can edit their scale and stuff like that, and I'll show all this later on. Now, first up, we're going to be looking at a joystick. You're going to be using 2 rotators set up in a specific angle that you'll see. Just follow through on the video. You basically have 2 rotators, 1 or 2 fuselage blocks. You're going to need more, of course, as you build the joystick up. But 2 fuselage blocks will be one as an anchor point where you connect everything, and the other one would be the base for the joystick itself to extend from the base of the shaft of the joystick, or the stick part of the joystick, kind of. Now, as you see, I'm rotating the rotators, one to the left and one forward. The one that I'm selecting now will be the roll, the other one is pitch, as shown. And after I'm setting them up, I'm going to connect them. Now, you'll notice I connect them when they're not connected to the creation itself, to the base, basically. I connect them outside. It's going to make stuff easier, and then I connect it as a unit from whichever block I choose, basically. So now this block that I'm editing is gonna be the anchor block to the whole joystick. So whenever I want to move it or move the entire thing, I just select this block and move it with all connected parts using the transform editor, basically. So as you see, I connect it to the bottom of the rotators, then I'm gonna grab it and place that on top. So that's now my anchor block. I'm going to copy that to make the base of the shaft, as I said before. And I'm editing all my parts in Overload, as you can see here, to change their values, to have no collisions, and also to reduce their weight so they have less effect. In a lot of things, I reduce the weight even more, to add a few more zeros in there. Now I can basically copy the joystick base block and extend it up. So I have a base for the joystick, and now I can also set up basically the range of motion for my rotators. Most joysticks move about 15 to 25, sometimes more, sometimes less, but 15 to 25 degrees of motion. And of course, I run a test. When you run a test, not only save, but run a test, hit the play button, it'll save all the new connection points, and you can see if everything works. And all overload edits that you've done will be saved automatically. Of course, you still need to save your creation. But do a lot of tests like this, run it, make sure that everything's moving as you want. Like you see, it's moving basically like I want, and now I can start moving. Now that I see that everything's moving like I want, I can move everything to place, basically. I can use the overload to scale things like the rotators down, and same thing goes to other parts, of course, as I go along. Next up, you wanna edit, you wanna align things up. Basically, you have the base anchor block and the base rotator on top of that, right above it, the one that I'm selecting now. You want to align the other rotator and the base of the shaft of the joystick according to that X and Y, X and Z positions. And that'll make sure that the joystick moves according to how it needs to. It'll look kind of funky, but as long as you set it to no collision, you won't have anything blowing up on you or making strange noises like it's breaking. So now I've moved everything into position. Next step, running a test. going outside, just checking that everything's moving according to where I need. Now, uh, there's kind of a thing, if you're connecting a rotator to the side of a block, it'll always rotate from that side, from that connecting point. It's hard for me to explain it kind of, but if you extend it on the Y axis like I did here, the bottom doesn't move on the rotators, it's moving out of alignment basically because the rotation is just above it in a way. But you can always grab the part that you want to edit even after it's connected. Just push it up on the y-axis. I usually use the y-axis because then I can just move it back down. But once it's separated and it cannot interact with the rotators and other parts below it, then I can edit its shape basically, re-edit the length of it and everything, and then just bring it down to the same Y, X, and Z position of the rotators, pulling the top of the joystick down to it. And that's basically the the gist of this. As you can see, again, test run, and I'm gonna be doing a lot of test runs. Now, sorry that if I'm talking fast or something like this. Please let me know in the comments if this bothers you. I'm not used to recording myself talking. Yeah, I don't do it a lot as well. Not something that I like doing as much as well. So I'll make mistakes and I'll ramble on about things here and there probably, or be too quiet in other parts. Now that everything is aligned, uh, and everything, as you can see, is not connected, it's kind of floating, the top and the bottom are not connected. Now will be a great time to edit the anchor block, the base block basically, that everything's connected. You can make it smaller, bigger, whatever size you want it. Now will be the best time. And of course, I'm saving going out doing a test to make sure that everything is running correctly. You can never have enough tests to see if things are moving. I know there are ways to check your movements in the editor, but it's not the same because if you're adding attachments or, like I said, doing some edits in the overload for some parts, then it's not going to register until you save it and basically go on a play or reload the editor. So that's a thing. Now, always, as I mentioned before, always make sure that you're editing parts away from the original part so they don't interact with each other. And when you're moving now the whole stack, make sure that you're moving the joystick shaft connect with the rotators. The anchor block can now be moved anywhere. You can select it and select it individually and move it to basically wherever you want from here. It's not really a part of the control, it's just connecting it to the creation. So now I'm basically pretty much done with this joystick. I'm just adding a little part on top, just for the controls of the thumbs and all these things. So I'm adding something very basic. But remember, you don't need to break your head too much. In this specific video, I come back to this joystick a few times to fix it and align it again and align it again. And of course, always checking that it still works, because you can work on it. If you don't check it works, you can be, all of a sudden you need to go back 30 or 40 steps. Now, next up is going to be a yoke configuration, how to set it up. You're going to need one piston, one rotator, and two blocks. Now, if you have existing blocks that are already overload edited, the best thing is just basically copying them and editing them, because it'll save you the time of going through overload again. And it's always fun not to go through overload and editing stuff if you can. Now, it's basically the same idea. You put an anchor block and you connect everything to that anchor block so you can move it around using that said anchor block, as I said in the joystick before. As I'm lining these up, you'll see that I have the anchor block set up. The piston is connected to that anchor block. Now I'm adding this block, some things might not connect to pistons directly. You need an extra block in the middle. In this case, I'm not going to need it. I'm going to remove it and put the rotators directly in place. Plus, my mouse has a clicking issue, so you'll see me grab a lot of things that I don't need to. But as you can see here, I'm just grabbing it, connecting it to the rotator, because it's a lot of times easier to connect to the rotator when it's not connected to anything. And I connect the rotator to the piston. So that's basically the alignment. I have the anchor, piston, rotator, and then the last part is going to be the yoke basic shape, and I'm going to build the rest of the yoke around that. Now I'm not going to invest too much in the yoke. I don't build yokes all that much. This is just a basic way of making it. So I'm just going to shape it generally and set it up to work, essentially. But I don't make too many things that use a yoke. I might make some things in the future. My bike's yoke is not really a yoke, it's a little different because it has another axis. But as you can see, now I have it moving backwards and forwards, but it's not moving forwards all the way. When I'm pitching forward, when I'm pitching nose down, it doesn't push in, even though it's set to pitch. Now, if you want to get a full movement in both ways, like pitch up and down, so the piston doesn't go only one way, you go to overload input controller, and you set up your minimum to -1, and that'll give you basically a minus for the negative pitch. So now when I'm going to move it, it's going to move both forwards and backwards. There we go. And of course, I didn't set up the roll correctly, so now I'm just gonna mess with that and make sure that this is inverted because it was moving the wrong way. And roll can move, so it basically works, just needs inverting and setting up. Now, that's why I'm doing all these tests, because yeah, sometimes it takes you 5, 6, 7, or 8 tests to get things aligned and which part needs to be inverted. It just takes time and patience, basically. Take your time when adjusting and building your own stuff. But this is a very basic yoke shape. So next up, I'm gonna start working on a throttle, but I'm gonna stop because I'm gonna go back, like I said before, going back to editing the joystick, and I'm gonna give it a little more angling and things like this. As I said before, as long as the parts are not connected, like you see they're separated from the rotators, I bring them back up using the transform editor and connected all parts, basically move them all up, and then I edit them there. That way they don't affect the connection to the rotators, basically. So now I have that joystick looking a little better. I just didn't connect it to the bottom, but I'll get to it in a few seconds. Yeah, sorry for the bit of quiet. So yeah, there you go. I'm fixing that joystick real quick. And also readjusting the scale of the rotators below the joystick so they're less visible. You can always go into overload and edit something. Now I'm going to start with the throttle, and it's going to be a bit of a pain in the neck because this anchor block, this big circle block basically, is going to be the center point. And sometimes when things are edited to small scales, they're very hard to connect. And I've noticed that in blocks specifically, the best place to connect it is always to the face, not to the side. I'm trying here to the side still, but you'll see when I connect it to the face, it'll connect directly to it. So here you go. Now I'm looking at the face of the fuselage block basically, and I can connect it directly to it. So that's rotator. I'm going to set up as throttle, and this little block is going to be the throttle shaft block, basically. So the whole throttle, like in the joystick, the throttle itself is going to be built on top of that. And I'm going to be using that circle big block as a guideline. for the movement basically. So the rotator is in the center. I'm gonna set it up as throttle, and I can invert it if I need it. You can also set exactly the range of motion for how much the throttle you want it to move, because it's not gonna move 180 degrees. They move something like 50, 60 depending on the throttle. Um, but there's also a way to make throttles using pistons. I'm not gonna get into it in this video because this throttle works well enough and I like it. Basically, I don't have anything more to say. I just don't want to mess with another throttle. You can understand how a piston design throttle would work. It's very simple. Basically, a piston and a few blocks at the end just to look like a throttle. Um, Now, you can copy and add blocks to extend the shaft, and sometimes things don't connect, like I said before. Sometimes the best way is just to use uh, the attachment from the mod and basically just, add a new attachment and set things up there. Uh, because when you're connecting things sometimes from the sides and things like this, the effect might not be the one that you want, and you probably know this. So you need to reset and kind of reconnect everything. And that's why it's good to maybe disconnect it and then reconnect it using the attachments, the designer suit mod, using the attachments selection there basically to put it up. Now, like I'm doing here, I'm setting it up, and it's sometimes easier if you basically take a part that it's hard to connect and everything. Just take it, separate it, and then edit it when it's unconnected to anything. That way won't have any problems with it changing everything around it. And then when you're done editing the shape of it, you can connect it. It can also be on top of other parts without being connected, so it's not affecting them even if you change the shape of it. So setting it up to throttle and going for a quick test run. I noticed that it's inverted, it's going backwards instead of forwards. I want it to go forwards like it does in a lot of airplanes, in most airplanes. Some of them though do go backwards. And as you'll see, I'm tilting it a bit backwards to have kind of a off position, because when a throttle is all the way backwards, it's kind of tilted 15, 20, 25 degrees backwards, depending different throttles. And at the end of the day, I'm now going to align the rotator and the throttle shaft itself, the throttle head itself, to the same X position as the big circle that is selected, as a big circle block that is selected, basically. So now I'm adding one more block, and this, like in my joystick and my yoke, this is going to be the anchor block, and I'm going to use this block to connect to anything that I want and move it around. Now, after it's connected, they're not connected to the creation. I can move the anchor block wherever I want, line it up with the X, Y, Z, or just X and Z of the throttle base that I'm using, and now I can connect it to the creation basically. So if I want, I can select that big circle sphere like I'm selecting now, and move that up and down, and that'll move the whole part, or I can move the entire thing by selecting the anchor block. And I'm just messing a bit with the yoke at the bottom. As I said before, you can always go back to editing existing parts when you probably know this when you're playing around designing something, and all of a sudden you notice another part on the side of the creation, and it's like, oh crap, I need to fix that, and you completely forget what you were doing for a few minutes, and then you're, oh yeah, I was doing that, and then you get back to it. Yeah, it happens. SimplePlanes does it to you sometimes. Now, of course, like everything, as mentioned before countless times, run a test, make sure that everything works. As you can see, throttle moves backwards, throttle moves forwards. Now, of course, you'll see I'm uploading this so you guys can use this however you want. Take it apart, final part, basically is I wanted to show you how to set up a light and give it a activation, like if you want it to be activated when you press um, your guns, or when you hit your brakes, or sorry, when you hit your when you fire your guns, or you hit your brakes or something like that. You can set it up in a lot of ways, uh, and as long as things are set up in the middle when you're editing them, it'll be easier to mirror them. Just a pointer. And always check your connections when you're mirroring things, because some things just don't connect when you do. Now, as you go into overload, edit beacon light, just go to input, and you can set it up from activate 1 to activate 8. You can set it up to brake, fire guns, and there's a lot more. I'll leave a link to a page that I go to where I learned all these. But if you set it up to fire guns, whenever you press the fire guns button, the light will go on. It's not gonna stay on. As soon as you let go of the fire button, it'll stop, basically. So it's an indicator, or if you want to add an effect to guns whenever you're pressing the trigger, it's another way to do it. So yeah, now you see as the left light now activates only when I'm pressing the fire guns button, whenever I'm pressing it. So now everything's white, so I'm gonna give it a bit of a color coding, just to get everything sorted and looking pretty. Make sure that you also save your creation with all the parts on it, so if something goes awry, of course it is all saved, and if you need to go back to it, you can also load it up. Now it's going to be about how to import something from here to an existing creation. So I'm going to grab it, create a subassembly, just drag it to the subassembly, name it whatever it is, in this case Joystick. I think I have a few, but from here, just gonna load, in this case I'm gonna load my Orca 2 unarmed, uh, and I'm gonna fit that joystick into the Orca. So I'm gonna go to subassemblies, load up, look for joystick. I have two, I know which one it is, so I'm gonna bring it in. Now it kinda looks big, so I'm gonna try to connect it using only the anchor block of that joystick, basically that bottom circle block that I'm selecting now. But I can already notice that it's way, way, way too big for what I want. So I'm gonna reload the parts, the cockpit parts basically, and from here I can edit the scale of the entire creation. Basically, if I go to the fine tuner, I can go to the scale tool. If I uncheck the calculate mass scale exhaust and scale only selected parts, then I can set the scale of whatever I want, and it'll scale the entire thing. Then basically I can re-grab my joystick and create a new subassembly that's 50% smaller, as you can see. So that'll just make it easier looking it up. I know that that's full scale, that this one is 50%, and so far. And you can do this with any instrument, basically. Just save it as a subassembly using that anchor point. Whatever you're making, just make an anchor point, grab it from that anchor point to the subassembly, then you can edit the scale of an entire creation. And putting it works, but let's give it a bit of a paint job. But I think it's a little too big. We're gonna put it inside the cockpit. A good thing to do, of course, is use X-ray for this to line things up where your cockpit is, and as long as you grab it from the anchor point connected parts, shift it to wherever you want to shift it. So right now, and you can always, as I mentioned before, you can always edit the anchor block. Just shift it to selected part only, move it a little lower so it doesn't interact with the rotators, and then you can edit it pretty much as you want. The rotators are connected on top of it. So as long as you don't go zero, I think, and even if you do, I think it still connects. Um, but once you're done connecting it, just move it to the altitude that you want. From here, the anchor is already connected to the Orca. It doesn't matter where it is, it but it dictates where the rest of it is going to be. So once you place your joystick wherever you want, you can move that anchor point to the side or to another point. Now, as you can see, the joystick is in, but it's, like I said, it is a little big. So we're gonna be doing the same thing. We're gonna be reloading. First, I'm gonna delete it from here because I don't want it to stay in the Orca. I'm gonna reload. Gonna follow the same process. Scale the whole thing to 25%. Make a whole new subassembly. Do the whole thing again. Load out the Orca, and now I'm bringing in joystick 0.25. As I said, you can pause at any point if you want to keep up reading or whatnot. Um, Now I'm using the uh, attachments from the mod to make sure that nothing is connected the wrong way, and make sure that everything is connected to where it is. And as you can see, the joystick fits pretty nicely. The scale is nice, moves around. I just didn't give it color, so it's harder to see than the one I did before. But the guns work, and it moves around with my joystick. And there it is. That's how you bring one of your creations, scale it down, and export it into it. Now, when I was recording this video, this was the point that I was kind of, alright, let's finish this. But then I forgot that I also wanted to make yaw controls, basically pedals for yaw controls and how to make those. Now, there are two ways to make these. There's the first way that I'm going to be showing, which is piston activated. Now the video is moving forward because you already know the first steps. It follows the same old steps. You put an anchor block, and then you start working anchors to each part. So now I'm using another block to connect a piston to, which is going to, and then a rotator to that, and then there's going to be a block attached to that. That little thin block that I was selecting, that's basically the anchor point for that pedal. In this case, it's the left pedal in a way. Um, it's facing backwards at the moment because that's how it's going to be facing you in the cockpit, and you'll see when I'm putting it in the Orca how it's facing. And I'm adding a connector, uh, and this will be used as a brake pedal. So I'm just adjusting the size and angle of the pedal that I want it to be as a basic. Now I mirrored it to the other side, but you don't need it. I just move this one to the middle, move the anchor point to the point that I want, and I just mirror from that selected anchor point. It'll set up the whole pedal basically. So now I have left and right pedals. Uh, Now I'm just checking that everything is set to where it is. Because I was copying from other used controllers already, all these things are already set to -1, so they can go all the way and things like this. Um, so that's basically the easy part. Now everything is set up. Now just making sure that everything is running accordingly. Now you see, both pistons are moving together, so no, it's not working accordingly. Need to go back into do some editing. And that's kind of the way that it goes making instruments sometimes. You just takes it a few tries, like I mentioned before. And sorry to dig about it, but that's just the way that it is. You do tests, you get better. Yeah, you get better at calculating things. Like you saw, the first joystick took me relatively shorter than what it takes me other things. Um, and that's just the way that it goes. So here I'm setting up using the overload. I'm looking at inputs on the rotators, and I'm setting it to brake, not brakes, without the S at the end, basically. And that, as soon as I activate the brakes, that'll show as inputs on the rotators. So as pedals should be, because that's where brakes are on pedals in airplanes in general. Usually, at least. Some are not there. But as you can see, they're reacting to the pedals, and I have separate yaw controls now that I set up one inverted to the other. And that's a very basic but very good, simple yaw input indicator that shows you your yaw control. Now you can move the anchor block by selected only, and then move the whole thing by connected parts. So I'm gonna move it all the way to the side because I also wanted to show you how to make yaw inputs using only rotators, including brake pedals. Now this one kind of took me a while. It was longer, so it's speeded up a lot more, and it's took longer because of editing and because once something is out of connection when you're into a process, it takes sometimes a long time to get back into it. But the gist of it is you have one rotator in the center, that's your yaw, left and right, basically. Uh, and each rotator at the ends of that little T, the one that I'm selecting now, is inverted in its yaw control to the center one. So when you're moving the pedals left and right, the feet will stay in position. They're not going to rotate with the center point. It just takes me some time to connect everything and get everything set up as I want. So bear with me here. Sometimes you need to use the attachments. Sometimes you try to do whatever you want, but sometimes things just don't go your way, and it's a SimplePlanes things as well. Sometimes editing can, sorry to say, suck. But then again, that's also part of the fun, I think. Now, once they're connected each to their own side, then you can make it wider or thinner. But I think that for me, that was one of my mistakes here because it kind of screws up with the connections. So you'll see, I'm doing a lot of edits on this one. Sorry also if I'm talking, I'm kind of trying to fill in the gaps, and I don't just want to put music like I usually do. I want to be more helpful in what I'm showing. And as you can see, I rotate left and right, but the pedals rotate with the center point. So back to the drawing board. I'm gonna disconnect the joints, basically the rotators, and I'm gonna reconnect the pedals because I'm trying to disconnect them from other parts, but they're still not rotating. So as you can see, things are connected to other things they're not supposed to, and something's not working. And sometimes the best way to go about something is just taking the part out and reconnecting it, and now you'll see that that pedal in the air that's floating is not rotating with the yaw pedals. So I'm gonna do the same thing for the other side. Make sure that they're all set up. I'm gonna move them a little lower and give them their x-axis individually, of course, so I don't mess with anything else. And now when I move left and right, the left one needs to be inverted. And back. So going to the left one. When you're editing something, always leave yourself a spot that you can interact with the parts, because like this I need to zoom in, and it sometimes gets very hard to edit whatever rotator or piston you're working on if it's in a bad place. So the best thing is kind of to edit them when you have room to approach them. But now everything is set up. Let's see. Nice, it works. But yeah, I forgot. Yeah, I need to add the brake pedals as well, which is 2 more rotators basically. And you'll see that the pedals are kind of rotating weirdly, and that's what I was talking about before, that it rotates according to the original point of connection in a way. And because they're now angled, it affects it kind of. So I'm gonna set them up as close as I can to the center point. I'm adding another rotator. I just copied one from the other yaw inputs that already has a brake input and all the information of overload in it. So now I just got it. I'm setting things up, and I'm gonna align it and mirror everything so I have two pedals, and I think that's gonna fix it. Well, hopefully it'll fix it, but well, you'll see. Yeah, no spoilers here. Yeah, it fixes it. Anyways, so after all these editing, some things might require more time if things don't go your way. Just be patient. Yeah, it happens. It can suck. But that's it. As you can see, now uh, both pedals move and they have brake inputs. And you see the joystick and yoke and throttle all move. Um, and that's the gist of it. You'll notice also there's a bit of a difference between speeds of how pistons move and rotators move. Pistons kind of move fast and then they slow down. Uh, on the other hand, rotators move directly. So I'm just gonna save this up, and one last thing, I'm gonna grab the pedals, scale them down to 25% already because I know that's the scale I'm probably gonna need. I'm gonna create a sub-assembly of them, uh, making sure that for me it's easier because I'm naming them yaw rotator because it's a rotator design, of course. And I'm gonna load up my Orca, and I'm gonna try to fit those in basically. And it's the same idea connected through that anchor block, and sometimes you need to try a few times. Doesn't always connect in the first time. And you can add connection, but notice what happens here because nose blocks change their shapes according to the scale of the block they're connected to. The moment I connect this, the nose changes its size. A way to fix this is basically just to take the nose and use the attachment from the mod to reattach it to its old point. But right now the pedals are inside, but they are a little small. I'd like to edit some things, but not everything. And I can still edit this actually now. I can just grab it and pull it down using the anchor block if I want. And this, to fix it, I just use the connection and I connect it to the block originally behind it, to the front of it, and it'll automatically resize itself. So that's fixed, and the yaw pedals are still connected. I'm just gonna edit some stuff here, the size of the pedals, the distance, and things like this. As long as you move them, again, mentioned before, I'll mention it again, as long as you move them away from the connectors and other parts that the part you're editing can interact with, then you can edit it and then just move it back to its position. Don't move it by clicking and dragging it, move it by using nudging, by, you know, Control E, or using the tool. I forget now it runs out of my head. The transform part tool, which I'm using here, and you can see how I'm moving it, the X, Y, and Z basically. And that's pretty much the gist of it. This is how I set up most of my cockpit controls and stuff like that. As shown in the beginning, this is part one. I'm gonna be making at least 2 or 3 parts. Next part, I'm gonna be looking at how to design your instrument panel and fit it into the cockpit as well. And part 3 will be more advanced instruments themselves, like speedometer and whatever I can make. Try to put that in a video like this one, pretty much. Let me know if you like this, and I really hope that this helps you design whatever you're designing. You can feel free to use whatever parts I'm uploading with this in whatever creations you want. And like I just said, I really hope this helps you, and you know, helps you getting into building these stuff yourself. So if you ever ask yourself how to do these things, now you can try and just follow along. And hopefully my voice wasn't too horrible for you. So anyways, thank you very much for watching. Leave a like if you did. Feel free to share this, and have a good one. I'll see you guys next time.